Twin Peaks, what I think. Hello and welcome to this week's video. This time I wanted to talk to you about, well, as the title suggests, Twin Peaks. Now, Twin Peaks was, of course, an American cult drama series that ran for 2 seasons back in the early 90s and then had the misfortune to get a revival in the late 2010s. We'll get onto that in a moment. Twin Peaks was famously a cult show, the co-creation of legendary weirdo film director David Lynch, along with Mark Frost, and focused on a seemingly normal small town in the Midwest in the United States that suddenly had its veneer of normality started to be scraped away to find something weird and strange underneath after the local prom queen is found murdered, Laura Palmer, of course. Now, the first season of Twin Peaks only lasted 8 episodes before being renewed for 22 episodes in the second season, and then unfortunately got cancelled. Now, I was a big fan of Twin Peaks back in the day. It's it's an interesting journey that I had with Twin Peaks. I watched the first season. All of my family watched the first season, and I liked it. I wasn't a massive fan, but I liked it. I seem to recall it coming back, and the rest of my family basically stopped watching it in halfway through episode 1 of season 2. I don't know, they couldn't remember who half the characters were, and the general weirdness of that episode basically put most of them right off. I kept watching, of course, because weird is my jam in many cases. I have to be honest though, when I really became a fan of Twin Peaks was when things got really weird. Often the point that many people say the show went off the rails was the point where the murder was resolved in season 2, mainly because, spoilers if you haven't seen Twin Peaks, I'm going to be talking spoilers here, so the revelation of the supernatural nature of the murder, that the killer was basically possessed by this mysterious entity known only as Bob, as Rowan Atkinson would say. That kind of was the point that just really interested me and really intrigued me, because obviously it's fantasy, it's supernatural, it's horror, and the moment you go to the moment you start doing that, I suddenly perk up and get a good deal more interesting. I remember Twin Peaks was a big deal back in the day. I remember I used to have a discussion with a regular discussion every week with 3 friends, well, 2 friends and one other guy, in my English class in high school. We'd always talk about Twin Peaks every week. I actually wrote about Twin Peaks as well in English class. I can't remember what it was. I think I'd completed an assignment. a long way ahead of everybody else, and the English teacher basically told me to write something else, and rather than just sit there doing nothing, and that if it was good it would contribute to my overall grade. And so I basically wrote a thing, and I think this was before the revelation of who killed Laura. I basically wrote a thing talking about the phenomenon and the theories and all the rest of it, and I got an A for it, and he asked me to write a follow-up thing after we'd found out the truth. I think I don't know if he was expecting me to be disappointed, but instead I wrote this lengthy essay talking about guilt and responsibility and the supernatural themes and all this lofty, pretentious crap. I got an A for it. But again, it's a measure of just what a big deal Twin Peaks was at that point. The other thing, and I've stayed a big fan of it ever since. I mean, I had it taped off the telly, and the first season I had taped off videos later on, because I didn't tape it straight away. And then I got the DVDs, and now I have the Blu-ray set. The next kind of thing, of course, was the movie, and I'll tell you this. And again, this shows you what a different world it was back then. The complete lack of an internet and anything like that. Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, the movie, got a very limited release in Australia in 1998. I had no idea that movie was made and released elsewhere in 1992. I had no clue about that. It was coming to the local theatre, and I'm like, oh, it's a Twin Peaks movie. And I'd kind of heard about it, but again, I thought it was a new movie. Why the hell it took us 6 years to get it, I have absolutely no idea. That's Australia for you. And again, a measure of even by that point, which was 7 years after the show ended, of still how invested I was. I went to see it at like a late night screening, because it was only at like late night screenings. It wasn't a big release with, shown in several times in the day and that. It was like a late night screening, which I never went to, because I'm not really a night person. But it was Twin Peaks. There was no way I was missing it. So I went to see it, and it's kind of funny now, because I remember thinking, wow, everybody looks exactly the same. I know it's only 6 years, but everyone looks exactly the same. And of course, actually, it was like the year after. It was like the year, if not straight after the show, they made the movie. Yeah, so that explains that. I liked the movie at the time. I didn't like it as much as the series, and certainly I've gone off it more and more later on. As the years have gone on, I can see that the second half of season 2 does go a little bit downhill. I still kind of like the second half, but certainly those filler episodes between the climax of the Laura Palmer story and the beginning of the Wyndham Earle story, they really do. You can see why ratings collapse, because it really feels like there's nothing going on and there's no real direction there. I think that was a big mistake. But I'm still very fond of season 2 and season 1. The next thing, of course, I remember buying some fanzines in the 90s. That Wrapped in Plastic fanzine. We managed to get some issues of that down here in Australia somehow. And I remember I've still got a couple of those. The next thing, of course, was the revival. What was it, 2018 or something like that? Season 3, supposedly. I'm sure the Lynch fanatics will throw brickbats at me. I absolutely fucking hated it, I have to be honest. At this point, I don't want any revivals. I want them to stop with revivals, because I haven't liked any of them. They're either shit, or they're just tired and sad and depressing. I hate them all. And Twin Peaks Season 3 was not Twin Peaks Season 3, really. I get the impression that it is much more of a David Lynch film thing than it is Twin Peaks. And I'm not really a fan of David Lynch outside of Twin Peaks. I'm sorry. I quite liked Mulholland Drive, because that had a lot of the Twin Peaks vibe to it. But generally speaking, I'm not really a fan of his stuff outside of the show. And season 3, to me, I mean, even before I started watching it, I was like, when you first hear it, you get excited. And then the reality sets in, and you think, it's like a quarter of a century over. Half the cast are dead. Many of them are retired, and the rest of them are ancient. And it's like, is this really a good idea? And then you get it, and you realize, no, it's actually not a good idea. It didn't help. And again, I'm sure this will get me hate. I just had the distinct impression that this was a David Lynch vanity project that had Twin Peaks shoehorned into it, because no one would have given him the money to make it otherwise. because it had so little to do with Twin Peaks. 75% of the show was not even set in Twin Peaks, and for like 90 to 95% of the time, Kyle MacLachlan wasn't even playing Cooper. I found that whole thing just incredibly tiresome and irritating. And what the fuck are you doing? Why are you wasting my time with this fucking shit? I'm sorry, I hated it. I just thought the whole thing was a complete waste of time and energy. The reality is it was way too fucking late. It was way too late. I'm kind of the opinion that instead of doing a bloody prequel back in 1992, they should have wrapped up the story then, while they actually had the actors young enough to still do it, and still alive enough, instead of doing a prequel and then waiting nearly 30 years to try and wrap it up in a kind of half-assed weird manner that doesn't have half the characters and cast it needs to, and doesn't even seem especially interested. I was particularly baffled by the attempt to make Diane a sort of romantic interest for Cooper, which came completely out of nowhere and made no absolute sense. And from what he never even mentioned Annie once. I get the feeling Lynch did not like the direction the show took after he'd pissed off. He shouldn't have pissed off in the first place, should he? But it's like ignoring it is just kind of insulting and weird. We have this thing where Coop has spent like 25 years stuck in this other dimension hellhole, and we don't mention the character that he got stuck in that hellhole for. He went in to save the girl he loved, and that's how he succeeded, but that's how he got stuck there, and he never even mentions her when he gets out and comes back to himself. Okay, that's incredibly realistic and believable. What the fuck? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm ranting, and I love Twin Peaks, the original show. I did not like the revival at all, but I do love the original show still. It's still a wonderful, bold, brilliant, radical piece of landscape shifting TV. And I still love it. It's just a shame that it didn't last as long as it should have done back at the time. And it's, in my opinion, something of a shame that it was revived at all, because I do consider season 3, if you can even call it that, a bit of an odd waste of time. There you go. Anyway, that's my view on Twin Peaks. I'm sure half of you will not care because you've never seen it, and the other half of you will be chucking things at the screen because you're total Lynch nuts. I'm not. I just really, really liked the original show. But as with so many things, they're not coming back, and any attempts to do so don't work. Anyway, that's the video for this week. I hope you enjoyed this barely coherent ramble, and I'll talk to you again soon.